I'm Wade Henderson. I'm president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. I'm also the Joseph L. Rao Jr. Professor of Public Interest Law here at the University of the District of Columbia's David A. Clark School of Law. The Leadership Conference is really the nation's largest and most diverse coalition of national organizations working to advance civil and human rights here in the United States. Our motto is that we're working to build an America as good as its ideals. We were founded in 1950 by giants of the civil and human rights movement. A. Philip Randolph, who was the first African-American labor leader, head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Roy Wilkins, who was then the National Secretary of the NAACP, and Arnold Aronson, who was a leader of the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council. The three of them helped to form one of the first political coalitions of non-governmental organizations that were committed to the advancement of the rights of African Americans, but in doing so, helped to promote the rights of all Americans. It's a distinguished history, a history that bore results first in 1957 with the first modern civil rights movement, which, by the way, helped to create the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. It created the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Every major civil and human rights bill that has been enacted by the U.S. Congress has the imprimatur, involvement, leadership of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. The March on Washington, which is being commemorated this year, the 50th anniversary, had the stamp of the Leadership Conference in many, many ways. And it served as a catalyst for both the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So the Leadership Conference has a very distinguished history. I think in the 21st century, we're focusing largely on five major policy issues. We're focusing to advance American democracy and to ensure the right to vote for all. We're focused on educational excellence and equity. We're focused on economic development, job development, infrastructure development that benefits those who have been largely left out of the economic and political equation of our country. We focus on wealth development. We focus on the rights of, shall we say, disadvantaged groups, including the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered group of Americans. And so in the first decade of the 21st century, I think the Leadership Conference has done a great deal to advance the overall, promise of American democracy for all. I'm a lawyer by training, and I work at the intersection of the three branches of our government, the judiciary, the executive branch of the government, and the legislative branch. And if we were to look at those three branches as three circles, I'm the Venn diagram. I'm at the center of those intersections between the three, affecting policy and political developments here in the U.S. So I work primarily as a lobbyist for civil and human rights. That's what I do. And I help to both frame and issues and to articulate why we're seeking change in a way that we hope moves the needle to support what we're trying to accomplish. I'm a native Washingtonian. I was born here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. I'm slightly north of 60. So in terms of my own personal involvement, I grew up, at least with the first quarter of my life, in a segregated America. And Washington, D.C., as the nation's capital, it was a particular contradiction for me, because I was always a firm believer in the promise of what America offered its citizens, but on the receiving end of policies that segregated and kept out vast numbers of the American people, I felt always that I was in turmoil because it was hard for me to reconcile the promise of America with the reality of America. As a student of history, I also was familiar, of course, with the journey from slavery to freedom of African Americans, but also of the country of which we are a part. And Washington, of course, has a very unique role to play in the history and the advancement of American democracy. Abraham Lincoln, of course, had a summer home here in D.C., which was near the place that I was born. And so just becoming familiar with all of the storied history of our country and how the struggle for American democracy only became meaningful for me in the sort of second quarter of my life. I was 15 years old when the March on Washington occurred. I sort of defied my parents by coming down to the march because I really wanted to participate in what was happening at the time. And it was inspirational to me. It inspired me. As did the struggle of many of the activists who were there at the march or who I became familiar with subsequently. And so my own trajectory really sort of involved this recognition that by law and by custom, I was not fully American, and that the struggle to become an American and to bring America into the fullness of democracy was what I decided to devote my life to. I guess the turmoil of the 60s really sort of gave me sort of two paths to pursue. I felt that I was very impressed with the work of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I was a little young at the time and didn't participate, but I was also aware that the path for my success probably was in a different direction because I was a little too dumb to be a criminal effectively, and really just felt that challenging the system would have been my demise. On the other hand, working as a lawyer and really helping to be a part of the change that I wanted to see come was for me very, very important, very meaningful, and that's why I do what I do today. Well, I think when you look at the chemistry of the social justice movement, and you look at the successes that have been achieved in a relatively short period of time, it has been with the combination of grassroots activism bubbling up from the bottom, a skillful use of law in a systematic way to achieve change through the courts, and political power born first from the voting booth, but then developed in a more sophisticated way with coalitions of others who share our views, and you see the successes that have been accomplished. I mean, when you think about the success of the civil and human rights movement, it is probably the single most transformative movement of the 20th century. And when you think about the origins of the movement with the birth of the NAACP in 1909 and with the struggles to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, that 1896 decision which established the principle of separate but equal, it took from 1896 to 1954 to work out the transition in the courts, and that was not by accident. People like Charles Hamilton Houston, the great scholar and dean of Howard University Law School, and his supporters really helped to construct a strategy, a legal and political strategy that helped bring about that change. When you think about the change that took place from the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? That came about too because of a skillful use of public display like the March on Washington and the kind of advocacy of skilled lawyers and policy analysts that the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights represents. So, I think that as a lawyer, the important changes that we've been able to get through the system have had a more lasting dimension and impact. And I think some of our greatest triumphs were born in the courtroom. Now, having said that, no victory is permanent. Eternal vigilance really is the price of victory and freedom. And I think that was borne out by the past passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 and all that it has done, and the subsequent overturning of a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, Section 4, which was overturned in this most recent Supreme Court decision this year. Well, first of all, let me say that race is unique among the policy dilemmas that our country has struggled to overcome. Race was the original sin of American democracy. It is the original stain on the flag, which I cherish so much and which most Americans do. It required a civil war and over a century of struggle just to achieve the basic notion of formal structural equality. That struggle, which was costly both in lives and treasure, continues to be waged, and it is the defining paradigm against which we compare equality for all. Now, the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement, which I think if one were to assume that the Brown decision was the floor on which other substantial changes were built, then the modern civil rights movement saw a pretty rapid advance in the rights of African Americans, and overturning legal segregation with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was extraordinary. But it was also a movement that helped to spawn an equality effort on behalf of many different groups. Women, for example, continue to have structural inequality, particularly in the economic sphere, but the advancement of women's rights had its genesis in the overall advancement of rights for African Americans, the Latino community and Asian community, which in turn benefited so much from the African American struggle, as too did the immigrant rights movement. When you think about the first changes in our immigration system that brought about a relative equality in terms of how countries have access to American immigration policy, it parallels the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, 1965, the Voting Rights Act, 1965, changes in our immigration policy to eliminate country profiles. All of that was important. So when I look at the advancement of the LGBT community in the U.S., assuming that one were to look at the Stonewall riot as the start of that process, its trajectory in time hasn't been substantially quicker than others. I will say, however, that given the nature of the value system which LGBT rights challenges, particularly around the issue of marriage equality, I will say that the advancement has been extraordinary. Now, all of those changes, LGBT changes, women, Latinos, immigrants, etc., have their genesis in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, 14th and 15th Amendment. And that amendment, those amendments, were passed, of course, in the aftermath of the Civil War with the express purpose of benefiting the equality of African Americans. So in that sense, I mean, the genesis of the entire rights effort finds its home in those changes that were intended to benefit African Americans, and yes, as an African American, I'm very proud of that. But I also know that there is extraordinary resistance to achieving the full measure of equality that those amendments gave promise to. So today's challenges, I mean, as a lawyer and as an activist in the 21st century, trying to lead a coalition to produce change, I'm aware that the problems of today are not the problems of 50 years ago. We have structural inequality, which continues to be a significant problem. We have residual discrimination, which has not been fully eradicated by the legislative and legal changes that have occurred. And we have an unwillingness on the part of leaders, unwillingness or inability on the part of leaders to reach common ground toward the benefit of an increasingly diverse country. And those remain, it seems to me, the real challenges of today.